Welcome back to the show, everybody. We got a good one for you this morning. We're going to talk about some terms you've heard before. The IMF, the Great Reset, the new Bretton Woods moment from the IMF, the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum. We're going to talk about those, but we're going to go a little deeper today. I think we're going to show you today how they pay for it and who is paying for it. Let's roll this beautiful intro. Here we go.
This is Digital Perspectives with Brad Kimes. Subscribe for new content notifications. Now, here's Brad Kimes. Come on in.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. You can follow me on Twitter at @BackupBradleyAbove at the top of the screen and everything that we're talking about here today. Let's go ahead and get into this really quickly. We're at $1.4 trillion for cryptocurrency market cap collectively. Bitcoin coming in right now at $47,411.40. It's off by 14.8% on the 7-day and slightly up on the 24-hour, coming down to the number 7 spot, courtesy of the dereliction of duty from the SEC on XRP, and the price is 0.4387. It is 44 cents just rolled. It's 0.4422. We are off by 22.46% on the 7-day, almost 2% up on the 24-hour. Let's go ahead and get into this. We have quite a bit to go over today, and I'm going to try to lay this out very tight. So let's get into this. Michael Val 5link says blockchain settlement and payment infrastructure provider Settle SETL has hired former Ripple executive Marjan Delatine to lead its payments business. Congratulations to Marjan Delatine, and we wish her all the best on her new chapter in her career. And Marcus Treacher, who left just a while ago as well. We see a lot of people that have been rolling out of Ripple and moving on to other areas. What I find interesting is most of these people are like Marjan Delatine, are landing in areas that appear to be the next step of addressing the fragmentation or growth and emergence of this digital asset space, which I find to be exciting. So some people say, look, it's only one or two things. They're either leaving because Ripple wasn't successful, or they're leaving because the work is done and they're on to these other things, as I just mentioned. I happen to be the eternal optimist. I think Ripple has done what they set out to do. Okay, barring the SEC lawsuit, once we get that out of the way, I think we'll see that. To me, here's more evidence to support that in a very indirect way. Ripple's partner, UK-based SoftBank, has put a multi-million-dollar deal amount into a Chinese digital exchange owned by ZT Global. Now, this screams to me, even in its indirect way here, that this is global market infrastructure being connected. And what do you know? It happens to be happening with a partner to Ripple. Now, moving here, we have a nice little post from Moonchaser. Thank you, Moonchaser. As banks and FIs prepare to switch to the ISO 20022 global payment standard by November 2022, already compliant cryptos will provide the foundation and be pivotal for the transition away from the legacy systems. I just thought that was so well said. I wanted to showcase that and remind people it's in theme today with what we're covering in the narrative here. So a reminder that ISO 20022 is the new global standard for payments, the modern global standard for payments of sophisticated financial institutions, for which Ripple has been brought on to the Standards Body Committee as the first and only member to this date that is actually working on implementing distributed ledger technology. Very, very exciting, knowing SWIFT and all the central banks and payment providers around the world are using this new global payment standard, and Ripple's right smack dab in the middle of it. Okay, let's keep going because it gets even better. This is the Financial Action Task Force from XRP Crypto Wolf says it will release updated guidance for digital assets in June. A public consultation draft with amendments and clarifications to its 2019 guidance will be coming in March. So next month, in just a few days, keep your head on a swivel. The FATF is that global regulatory body that delivers guidance from the international level, because it's all the different major countries and economies of major countries and representatives that sit on that panel to help craft international regulation or recommendations that are quickly adopted by the countries that belong to that G20 organization. We saw this happen back in 2019 when they brought in KYC and AML and CFT for terrorism and implemented those things, plus the travel rule, which is still being rolled around by some countries. But the reality is that we established then that we see a top-down trend. So when we see these things coming from a large group, international group like the G20 and the regulatory body FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, I would say pay very close attention, because whatever they come out with, you're going to see. Because last time this happened, we saw the United States Secretary of Treasury at the time, Steve Mnuchin, come out within 24 or 48 hours and endorse these guidelines. I would look to see something very similar happen again here in March. So here is what we've all talked about before, a new Bretton Woods moment from IMF. We've heard the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum. Stay with me here. Trust me, I am going to take you to the river. You don't want to drink the water, it's on you. But I'm going to take you there. This is the IMF to propose ways to improve transparency of trade in SDR currency reserve. For those of you who don't know, the SDR is a special drawing right. And it is basically could be looked at, it's not currency per se. Let's look at this to understand this more like a bond issuance. So it is a bond that is backed by the 5 major currencies of the world that the IMF uses in a weighted basket. And they weight the different currencies, right? And then from that, the IMF issues the SDR currency reserve, or their bond, to countries that need to take loans or are already having trouble paying back, let's say, their bondholders on debt that they may have. The IMF will come in and say, hey, we'll help you out here. You're obviously struggling. We'll issue X amount of SDR bonds, treasury notes to you, and you can cash these in as needed to make your payments and to pay off those other bondholders, and then you will be beholden to us, the IMF. That's how they do it. And that's why it's basically a problem for the larger, stronger countries that have their own sovereign currencies, because they never want to get too deep in bed with the IMF, because it could challenge the sovereignty of their nation and their currency. So now, with that being said, now that we got everybody up to snuff, let's take a look at this really quickly. The International Monetary Fund on Friday said it would propose ways to improve transparency and accountability of how its special drawing rights are used, a key U.S. demand for its support of a new issuance of IMF's own currency, which is really more like a bond or a note, because you can't spend it in a store to go buy a haircut or soda pop and chips or whatever, right? So it goes through all of this and says that first deputy managing director of the IMF said a new allocation of SDRs would boost the reserve position of all IMF members, calling a far superior option to the alternatives currently available to the poorer countries. The IMF will respond to the G20's call for a proposal on general allocation of the special drawing rights, he said in a tweet. So that's countries see maximum benefits from the new SDR, will propose ways to improve transparency, accountability, and how SDRs are allocated and traded. So it's about being able to see what these countries actually did with the SDRs after they were allotted whatever that amount is. They will track you, right? Which they should. They don't want to see to give them, an allotment of 10 million or billion, SDRs, and then come to find out, some rogue leader takes it instead of putting it into things that can, build the country up and create jobs and all its sustainability, right? So it makes sense. This is James Rickards. So he's an American lawyer, an economist, investment banker, speaker. He's a gold bug and a media commentator, as well as an amazing author. And he's so smart. And obviously, he's a huge gold guy. So everything leads back to gold for him. But nevertheless, this is from Michael Val 5 Links. And we're getting ready to hear this. And I also had this article sent to me from Digital Asset Investor. Shout out to you, my friend. I appreciate it. Now, looks like long expected Great Reset is finally here. Details varying depending on the source, but the basic idea is that the current global monetary system centered around the dollar is inherently unstable and needs to be reformed. I'm sorry, did you hear that? The current global monetary system centered around the dollar is inherently unstable and needs to be reformed. How you suppose they're going to do that? Well, I'm going to show you. First of all, let's take a look at this because this is really an incredible article. And what we see here is that only solution is to use non-digital, non-bank store wealth that cannot be traced or manipulated if you're looking to avoid the government he's talking about and confiscation of things. And then he says, given the planned dollar devaluation, that's right. They're planning a huge dollar devaluation at the IMF, and I'm going to prove that to you in a second too. But let's go up here and show you what this is about when it moves to a digital system here. I've said it all along, Jim says, that you cannot put negative interest rates on consumers until you eliminate cash. Otherwise, savers would just withdraw the cash from the banks, forming a bank run, just like we saw back in the 1930s, right? Caused a bank run in the United States on the Fed. And they would stuff it in their mattress to avoid the negative interest rates. One of the ECB board members, which was Fabio Panetta, yep, that's who it was, board member says that negative interest rates, really confiscation, will be applied as a penalty against hoarding cash. In plain English, that means they will create digital money, force you to spend it, and if you don't spend it, they will take it away as a negative rate. And we've talked about that with Cryptopolis on this show as well. All right, let's go back up here. This is really what we're talking about here, okay? The Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 set the global financial system that still prevails today. The period between 69 and 71 can be regarded as the first reset, which involved creation of the special drawing rights, ticker XDR, the devaluation of the dollar, and the end of the gold standard. For years, commentators, myself included, have discussed the next global monetary realignment, which is sometimes called the Big Reset or the Great Reset. Now it looks like the long-expected Great Reset is finally here, Jim says. Details varying depending on the source, but the basic idea is that the current global monetary system centered around the dollar is inherently unstable and needs to be reformed. I'm going to show you directly in just 1 second that the IMF is going to say that directly to you. Part of the problem is due to a process called the Triffin dilemma, named after the economist Robert Triffin. And just to explain that very quickly, is that it's said that the issuer of a dominant reserve currency had to run trade deficits so that the rest of the world could have enough of the currency to buy goods from the issuer and expand world trade. But if you ran deficit long enough, you would eventually go broke. That said, what about the dollar in the early 60s? In the 69, the IMF created the SDR, possibly to serve as a source of liquidity, an alternative to the dollar. In 1971, the dollar did devalue relative to gold and other major currencies. SDRs were issued by the IMF in 70 to 81. None were issued from 81 till 2009 during the global financial crisis again. And then we see the testing of the plumbing. 2009 issuance was a case of the IMF testing the plumbing of the system to make sure it would work properly because 0 SDRs were issued from 1981 till 2009. The IMF wanted to rehearse the governance, computational, and legal processing for issuing SDRs. Are you hearing this? The purpose was partly to alleviate liquidity concerns at the time, but is also to make sure that the system works in case a large new issuance was needed, which is being called for now. On short notice, the 2009 experiment showed that the system worked fine. Since 2009, the IMF has proceeded in slow steps to create platform for massive new issuances of SDRs and creation of deep liquidity pool of SDR-denominated assets. On January 7, 2011, the IMF issued a master plan for replacing the dollar with SDRs. This included the creation of SDR bond market. Are you hearing this? We've talked about the idea of there being a bond market behind these assets. We've talked about the idea of XRP potentially getting a security designation, which would allow it to operate like a bond, but with utility. Now, we don't know that this will happen, but I mean, these things are leaning in. Instead of creation of a SDR bond market, or this includes the creation of an SDR bond market, SDR dealers and ancillary facilities such as repo derivatives, settlement and clearance channels, and the entire apparatus of liquid bond market. A liquid bond market is critical to U.S. Treasury bonds are among the world's most liquid securities, which makes the dollar a legitimate reserve currency. The IMF study recommends that the SDR bond market replicate the infrastructure of the U.S. Treasury markets with hedging, financing, settlement, and clearance mechanisms substantially similar to those used to support trading in Treasury securities today. This sounds exactly like what we talk about on this channel. Whether they call it a security or not, is being able to get the new financial system in place to where it can actually handle the movement of the bond market onto the ledger. Come on in. So here we see that China gets a seat at the monetary table. In July 2016, the IMF issued paper calling for the creation of private SDR bond market. These bonds are called MSDRs, in contrast to OSDRs for the official SDR. In 2016, we're almost done here, and we're going to a new piece. You're going to want to see this. Stay with me, everyone. In 2016, the World Bank announced that it would issue the SDR-denominated bonds to private issuers. Industrial Commercial Bank of China, the largest bank in China, will be the lead underwriter on the deal. In September 2016, the IMF included the Chinese yuan in the SDR basket, giving China a seat at the monetary table, so the framework has been created to expand the SDR scope. The SDR can be issued in abundance to IMF members and used in future for a select list of most important transactions, including, in transactions in the world, including balance of payments and settlements, oil pricing, and the financial accounts of the world's largest corporations such as ExxonMobil, Toyota, and Royal Dutch Shell. Now, the IMF is planning to issue $500 billion of new SDRs, although some Democrat senators are lobbying for an issuance of $2 trillion SDRs or more, and I'm about to show you it's not $2 trillion, it's $3 trillion. And guess who's going to pay for it? That's right, the U.S. Now let's take a look at this before we look at that. This is Barry Eichengreen. I've covered this back in August last summer, and I'm going to tell you, he is about to tell you from an IMF conference that I covered about the external adjustment to dominant currencies like the U.S. dollar. And he's getting ready to tell you about the Triffin dilemma all over again. Listen to this.
But the conclusion, to my mind, is depressing because it implies that monetary policy is less effective than we have traditionally thought. In a world where sterilized intervention doesn't do much, monetary policy and exchange rate movements go together. When you're at the zero lower bound, monetary policy works even more heavily by moving the exchange rate because it can't move the interest rate. And if it really is the case that you get less stimulus to exports and less oomph from monetary policy generally, I think it's incumbent on all of us to think about what to do instead. So is this project an argument for fiscal policy? That's depressing because fiscal policy is heavily politicized. Fiscal policy works with even longer lags typically than monetary policy. What do we need to do in terms of reforming our fiscal institutions if we're going to have to rely on them more heavily? And the second part of the question would be, what do we have to do to get out of this position of dollar dominance? Because it has the undesirable effect of weakening monetary policy, and it will run up sooner or later against the 21st century Triffin dilemma problem.
There you have it, the 21st century Triffin dilemma problem. This is what the IMF is discussing last summer. How do we deal with eliminating the U.S. dollar as a global reserve currency and make an external adjustment and debase and devalue that dollar and every other dollar as it sits on the pairing in the FX market. That's what we're talking about here. And actually, that's not what we're talking about. It's what we're reporting here. This is what they're talking about. This is where the money's going to come from. And by the way, all of this is about new issuance of SDRs and making them more trackable, which means they're going to tokenize it, because the only way to really track it is to tokenize it and make it digital, an electronic SDR. This is Huizinga, Representative Huizinga, who this past summer is telling you his disgust because they are putting through a $3 trillion bill with no strings attached to the IMF, so they can do whatever they want with the money. Don't believe me when I say it. Listen to him say it.
Hey everybody, this is Bill Huizinga, obviously in Washington, not in West Michigan, hoping to head back home this afternoon. But I gotta tell you, I'm gonna be walking in for our last vote here momentarily, and I am just flabbergasted that my Democrat colleagues are going to be voting affirmative on this bill, and here's one of the reasons why. This is the state of play, where not only are we going into debt for our own country, we're now going to be going into debt for other countries. And I'm gonna, and this is kind of a little awkward, but I'm gonna read a statement that I had intended to read on the House floor, but the Democrat majority limited our time this morning of 1 minute, and so I wasn't able to get that done. So I'm going to do it here with you now, and then we're going to talk a little bit about this. So here's my statement that I intend on the House floor. I rise in opposition to the partisan bill we have been debating the past couple of days. Under language inserted at the Rules Committee, the U.S. would direct the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to lavish $3 trillion on countries around the world. This is a permanent, no-strings-attached liquidity for foreign governments. The Democrats' bill would therefore send...
Did you hear that? $3 trillion with no strings attached.
At least $20 billion to the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism, Iran. It means at least $17 billion for the Assad regime in Syria. There's also more than $170 billion for the Chinese Communist Party as it takes over Hong Kong and builds internment camps, and another $75 billion for Russia. Meanwhile, an amendment I offered to prevent Americans' banks from financing Iranians who have been sanctioned for terrorism and human rights abuses wasn't even made in order by the Rules Committee. Strange priorities from the Democrats.
Look, it's strange priorities from anybody. Yeah, I'll tell you that right now. You know, but the fact is, I just showed you what the intentions are. The intentions are a great reset. The intentions are a new Bretton Woods. Well, what does that mean? That means a new global reserve currency, because that's what came out of the last Bretton Woods we had in 44. It was the change from the pound to the US dollar. Right? So they're calling, when they say a new Bretton Woods, what they actually are saying, because guess what else came out of Bretton Woods? The birth of the IMF itself. So a new central bank, I don't know. Ripple applied in Wyoming for a business license. Is the next step for them to get a banking charter in Wyoming and become that new central bank? They do have their own form of money. It's not proof of stake. It's not proof of work. It's already pre-mined. They have 50 plus billion in escrow. Could they become the next new central bank as a new Bretton Woods moment? And could we see a new bridge currency introduced to the world that could be XRP, that could also serve as an electronic SDR? I don't know, but I do know that that's their mantra, and that's what that means to say a new Bretton Woods moment. I do know that a great reset involves the idea of you owning nothing and you'll be happy, which sounds an awful lot like a debt jubilee to me. And with all the printing of $3 trillion just flying off the shelf like it means nothing, maybe there's an understanding back end at the international level from G20 or even G7 that they're going to print everything they need for this reset, this great reset. And when they're ready to do it, they'll debase the dollar and they'll set this new neutral asset, a bridge asset to the world in between all the money. There's one little final hang up to all of this. You got to have taxes figured out internationally. How's all the different governments going to get theirs? If you can't figure that out, you don't have a solution. Well, I think we're one step closer. This is Janet Yellen. U.S. drops key obstacle to global digital tax. Let's just come right down here. European officials said that U.S. shifts was an important breakthrough. This is a giant step forward on path towards an agreement among the participating states by the summer, German finance minister said. French economy minister said a deal should be reached by summer, calling for negotiations to be concluded without delay. It's all about how to tax big tech firms. I tell you what, there's a lot of people out here who say, that's some pie in the sky stuff. But the thing is, I didn't make anything up about what you just saw. I showed you what they're doing. I showed you what their narrative is. What's going to come of it? Right? Is this all for nothing? I don't hardly think so. I don't think it's a question of if they're going to do it. I think the question is when are they going to do it? And as far as that goes, I don't feel like that is too far off if you've got taxes figured out for the globe about it. That's going to do it for me. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe, leave a comment below, and share with somebody you know, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Make sure to check out all the links in the description box and the comment section for anything that you may want or need. By the way, Unstoppable Domains is exactly that. It's GoDaddy on steroids. They have just connected the .cryptos and the .zills, I believe, with all of the major search engines. So it now resolves in Google Chrome, Firefox, and the like. I think it's even Brave browser and all that too. And even websites, HTTP protocol. This is enormous what's going on. And there's so much more going on with them as well. And I can't wait to tell you, make sure you get your .crypto today. I'll catch all of you on the next one.